The Spell of the Sorcerer's Skull by John Bellairs. Chapter 8. Numb nightmare descended on Johnny. His scalp tingled and he found it hard to breathe. In a flash he knew what the freezing lump in his pocket was. It was the skull come back from a watery grave. Ahead of him the evil orange mask seemed to burn a hole in the night. It pulsated, sending out waves of power. Against his will, Johnny shuffled closer, moving woodenly like a robot. He clumped up the sagging steps and walked in through the dark doorway. A cobweb brushed his face, and he found that he could not raise his hand to brush it aside. He was in a shadowy room with a rotting plank floor, and he had barely time to wonder why there was no pumpkin in the room when a violent blow brought him to his knees. A ghastly, impossibly huge jack-o'-lantern face appeared spread across one wall of the room. It was throbbing, and the air around Johnny heaved in an insane, feverish rhythm. His chest felt tight, and his eyesight was clouded by an icy mist that wrapped itself around him. Johnny struggled for breath. The life was being pumped out of him. He was going to die. Suddenly a voice burst in on his brain, a harsh, grating, stony voice that told him he would never again meddle in things beyond his understanding. "Death is an eternal sleep," said the voice, and it said it over and over like a cracked record. Desperately, Johnny fought to stay alive, but he knew that he was losing. He was starting to black out. Just before he lost consciousness, he heard something, a commotion in the room. A door slammed, and somebody shouted strange words that sounded like, "Lumps and crust!" A voice rang out 2 or 3 times, and then Johnny was gone. When he woke up, he was lying on the damp grass outside the old shack. Fergie was kneeling beside him, and Father Higgins was standing over him, looking very huge and forbidding, in spite of the friendly smile on his face. In his large, hairy hand, the priest was holding a small silver crucifix on a chain. "What? What?" muttered Johnny thickly. He felt limp and woozy, as if he had just recovered from the flu. With an effort, he raised his head and glanced toward the old shack. It was dark, lost in the evening shadows. Then a sudden stab of terror hit him, and he fumbled at his thigh. It was gone. The skull, the thing that had suddenly appeared in his pocket, it had vanished. Johnny turned his head and looked at Fergie. "Did you take it?" he asked in a quavering voice. Fergie looked puzzled. "Take what, John, baby? I don't know what you're talking about." With an effort, Johnny forced himself to sit up. As he did this, Father Higgins sank to his knees beside him. He still clutched the crucifix and held it up as if he were using it to ward off an attacker. With his other hand, he tried gently to force Johnny to lie back on the ground. "Easy, John, easy," said the priest softly. "You've been through something awful, and you're probably still weak. The powers of darkness were here, and they were after you. You need some rest." But Johnny shook off the priest's hand. He was feeling better by the minute. "Father," he said, pointing toward the dark house. Did you see it?" Father Higgins looked grim. "If you mean the Halloween face, yes, I saw it. I saw it from way up at the top of the hill, where I was talking with young Byron here. He was trying to figure out where you had gone to, and then all of a sudden I saw that face, and I remembered what you had told me, so I charged on down the hill and busted into the house over there, and all of a sudden I was face to face with that horrible thing on the wall, and I felt the presence of evil all over my body, and I don't mind telling you, I nearly turned and ran, but I pulled myself together, and then I gave the rotten, miserable thing a good dose of this." He held up the crucifix and shook it menacingly. "This is a blessed crucifix, and there's a glass bubble in it, and underneath are 2 splinters from the true cross, the cross Jesus was crucified on. And I said, 'Lumen Christi,' which means light of Christ. It's a powerful charm, and part of the Holy Saturday service. You see..." Johnny laid his hand on the priest's arm. "Father," he said nervously, I have to tell you something." Father Higgins grinned. "I'll just bet you do. Well, go ahead, I'm listening." Johnny began slowly, with lots of little stops and starts. As clearly as he could, he explained about the skull. He told how he had found it, how it had felt when he owned it, and why he had finally decided to get rid of it. He also described the strange vision he had had in the workroom of the Fitzwilliam Inn at midnight. This was the first time Johnny had been able to tell anyone about these things, and it felt wonderful to just get everything off his chest. How come I couldn't talk about this before?" he asked, staring hard at the priest. I couldn't tell the professor. Every time I tried, I got this awful pain in my chest, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. Why couldn't I tell him? John, said Father Higgins slowly and gravely, it is becoming more and more clear to me that we are dealing with some kind of incredibly evil intelligence, a disembodied spirit that has decided to attack you and the professor for some reason. The skull and the jack-o'-lantern face and the scarecrow you saw on the ferry boat, they are all manifestations of that evil mind. Well, the mind did not want you to tip off the prof that something bad was going to happen to him. It also did not want you to do anything that might clear up the mystery of the prof's disappearance. And do you want to know why you can tell us now? The evil influence was driven off by the power of the true cross. You feel better now, don't you, getting the thing out in the open, I mean? Johnny nodded. Yeah, I do. Do you think that vision I saw at the Fitzwilliam Inn has anything to do with the second clue? The one about the great reckoning in a little room? I should have thought of this before, but it just wasn't clear to me. What I'm trying to say is the room in the vision is the little room, the dollhouse room, only full-sized. Father Higgins patted Johnny on the shoulder. Very good, my friend. Very good. And a reckoning is the settling of an account. That is one meaning of the word, anyway. And it certainly looks like you saw a reenactment of the way the professor's granduncle got his account settled. Things are getting clearer. Not a whole lot clearer, but somewhat clearer. I wish we knew more about the skull that you took from the dollhouse room. If we knew why the prof's father chose to put it in the... Will it come back? Johnny blurted suddenly. He sounded very anxious. That is, it came back once, so it must be able to come back whenever it wants to. How am I going to get rid of it? I don't know, John, said Father Higgins. He bit his lip and glared into the night. I wish I knew more about what's going on, but I don't. However, I do know this. My crucifix saved you, and so you better keep it for the time being. Here. Father Higgins passed the crucifix into Johnny's hand. There's a chain on it, he went on. Put it around your neck and don't take it off for any reason. You understand? Johnny nodded and smiled gratefully. He looped the chain around his neck and slid the crucifix in under his shirt. But just as he had finished doing this, he turned his head and noticed something. Fergie was gone. Hey, Father, he exclaimed, looking about wildly. What happened to Fergie? With a loud exclamation, Father Higgins sprung to his feet. He turned just in time to see Fergie appear out of the darkness. He was coming from the direction of the shack, and he was holding something in his hands. Father Higgins' jaw sagged, then he got angry. Byron! He roared. What the devil do you think you're doing? Fergie smiled sheepishly and shrugged. I just thought I'd like to go in and see what the old place was like. Just to see, you know? Father Higgins was stunned. Good grief, man! Do you realize what that house is? It's a den of Satan! Don't you have any sense of all? And what in the name of heaven is that thing you've got in your hands? Fergie held the thing out, and now Johnny saw that he had in his hands an old leather-bound book with dog-eared covers. It looked very dirty, with a long piece of cobweb trailed from one end of it. With a look of awed fear on his face, Father Higgins reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and took out a penlight. He snapped it on and played with the narrow beam over the cover of the book. In a gingerly way, he took hold of the cover and folded it back. Curious, Johnny scrambled to his feet and joined the other two, who were huddled over the book, peering at the flyleaf. Now Johnny saw that there was old-fashioned writing with lots of odd loops and flowing swirls on the moldy liver-spotted sheet. But it was not hard to read. It said, Warren Windrow, a great reckoning in a little room. This I dreamt, April 30, 1842. Well, I'll be darned, exclaimed Father Higgins, with an odd expression on his face. He reached out and carefully peeled back the flyleaf. Now they were looking at the title page. At the top, large black letters